We're now into version 4, and with it has come a whole new path, new teams, and updates to older teams. With 4.2 on the horizon, alongside new enemies and even more shilling, it's becoming increasingly more important for free-to-play or low spenders to allocate their pulls wisely if they wish to clear endgame content comfortably. Whether someone chooses to vertically or horizontally invest in their account is generally up to personal preference, but Star Rail has been heavily rewarding those who choose to vertically invest. With that in mind, I think it's important to get into how to vertically invest into your account correctly, and get into how the context of your account changes everything. Okay, so I threw a few terms at you there, so let's just make sure we're on the same page here and what I mean exactly. So, what is vertical investment? Well, in the context of gacha games, it basically means to consolidate your pulls into making your pre-existing or future teams stronger. For HSR, the best example of something like this would be an account that, let's say, pulled E2 Finon with his best team, then pulled E1 Hycealans and her best team, with the idea of pulling more Eidolons or light cones when the content becomes too challenging for these teams. This strategy focuses a lot more on pre-planning each pull you make, prioritizing the Eidolons or light cones that yield the most benefits at the lowest cost. On the other hand, horizontal investment takes the opposite approach, as it's generally described as spreading your pulls out into many different archetypes, focusing solely on getting it up and running, then moving on to the newest thing. For HSR, accounts that have some form of dot, break, memo slop, hypercarry, follow-up, and the newly released Elation teams would definitely fit the bill of being a horizontal investor. The strategy with this form of investment is that you capitalize on the shilling the endgame brings for specific archetypes, and use it to get your clears. As such, you generally don't go beyond Easy Res 1 when you pull a character, instead put your focus on getting the new, necessary teammates, then moving on to the new and shiny characters that release afterwards. Considering both strategies have very clear upsides and downsides, it may not be immediately clear why vertical investment is seen as stronger in HSR, and while I admit it's not as black and white as I may have led you to believe, the increasing strength placed in early Eidolons has shifted things to be far more in favor of vertical investment as time's passed. It's also important to note that this isn't exclusive to Star Rail, by the way, as the meta shift from Maviku release in Genshin, coinciding with the meta shift from Amphorius in HSR, shows that there was a clear change in game design from Hoyo here. Back to Star Rail though, I'd say that horizontal investment largely fails because Hoyo has become far more okay with releasing somewhat incomplete or inflexible kits, and fixing those things through an E1 or E2. Funnily enough, the characters I was talking about earlier, Finon and Hycealans, are pretty good examples of this. In case of Finon, he has very high bursts of damage, but his easier kit restricts his action count and gives no workarounds. And guess what? His E2 fixes that. With Hycealans, she has a special bleed dot that scales with the amount of unique dots on an enemy, with a cap of 8, and with her easier teams, only being able to apply 6 of them at most. Then guess what? Her E1 fixes that too. So, mind you, this is still happening right now, since as of V2 of 4.2 beta, Evanesia's E1 allows you to run any hypercarry team, and do so at a level that can match her elation compositions. All this has been ignoring the fact that numerically, these Eidolons provide far bigger damage increases than signatures, so much so, in fact, that these teams have lasted far longer in the meta than they should have, oftentimes matching the shill teams in their content with enough investment. Now I'd like to dive deeper into how vertical investment alters characters on an individual level, and how those changes impact their strength relative to other characters. And what better way is there to do that than a tier list? So, before I begin, I'm going to preface this by saying that I'll be using the cost system to categorize them. Now if you don't know what the cost system is, it's basically an arbitrary system people made to determine how much 5-star pulls have been put into a character. It's super simple. I'll describe it more as it becomes relevant. But also, Another disclaimer. I decided to add the V2 rendition of Silverwolf, Evanescia, and Nova Flare Firefly solely because I got bored, I'll be honest. So, don't take their placement too seriously, since it'll change in like a day or two, depending on when I finish editing. With all that being said, here's how I'd rank all the modern DPS at one cost, so E0 S0. Keep in mind that I'm trying to keep this very vanilla and just rank the DPS being assumed in their best teams. And even then, their individual placement doesn't actually matter. It's their placement relative to their other DPS that matters. So for example, what matters isn't that an axe is placed at the very top of strong. What matters is that he's 2 tiers above E0 S0 Phynon, while using almost the exact same team. But either way, through this list you can see very different placements than what many actually say the strength level of these characters are. For instance, characters like Anaxa and Firefly overperform at this level because once they get their teammates, they're pretty complete. Whereas characters like Aglaya and Phynon that don't have many strong teammate options lose a lot without their E1 or E2 respectively. Moving on to 2 cost, you see that those 2 characters, on top of many others, change drastically now that either their E1 or their signature is available to them. And I think as of live server, so 4.1, it's honestly not much of a debate that at a 2 cost level investment, Hycealans, and by extension Dot, is the best team in the game, as her E1 is a strong personal damage increase and an even stronger team DPS increase. Yet, many seem convinced that the full Memo Slop team is still the inarguable best team in the game at all levels of investment. Speaking of that team, by the way, Evernight is, and will remain, in the top tiers over Castris, since the rendition of the team that chooses RMC over Castris is better at this level of investment. Also, for those who are shocked at Mighty's placement, do not confuse pull value with character strength. He may not be a strong pull, but Cyrene was an insane upskill for the guy. So the narrative being built around him being the worst Amphoria's DPS is just kinda wrong after Cyrene's release. Now on to 3 cost, where things start to change drastically, since E2s are now on the table. With that, it should really come as no surprise that Phynon shoots all the way up to the top, as him gaining signature at 2 cost does not even come close to giving that up, and instead gaining his E2 at 3 cost. It's really at this level where the narrative that Phynon is a top tier DPS starts to actually be true, as nothing really compares to the upscale that his E2 provides. More importantly though, is that Anaxa has fallen off hard since his E1 is fairly unsubstantial, unless it gets you enough Death Shred to hit 100%. And now he's using the same teammates as Phynon, but finally performing worse than him. I also haven't spoken much about Firefly, but spoiler alert, she's not moving. As of V2 of the 4.2 beta, her E2 just makes her the best DPS in the game, and it's not even like she was that far off from the title after Dolly's release, so I honestly don't know what they were thinking. Perhaps she'll be nerfed in V3? I don't know, who knows. Then finally, we got 4 cost. Generally the stopping point for most people, so it'll be the last tier list we do today. At this level though, not much should really be surprising, as the characters that gain more from their Eidolons, like Castris or Mighty, naturally start to outpace the characters who perform well in lower cost, like Anaxa. It is at this cost that Castris will actually outpace RMC in a Memo Slop team, because our numbers just become too large to ignore. And in terms of raw strength, you can actually make the argument that Mighty can easily slot into the top tier, but the opportunity cost of being reliant on Cyrene becomes a big problem in team building. Besides that though, I've intentionally not spoken too much about Evanescia and Silverwolf, since their current kits will likely change dramatically by the time beta ends. But I think it's important to note that at this level of investment, Silverwolf and Sparksy will finally outpace Evanescia, since both characters have extremely strong E2s, while Evanescia very much so does not right now. Now you might be thinking, wow, That was a lot of information, right? But what if I said all of that didn't matter depending on your account? So let's talk a little bit about what makes theory crafting, or just making any blanket recommendation to others in gacha games, extremely difficult. The concept of context. To accurately do so, I'll use my account as a reference, since I think it serves to kind of elevate the point that my own account, in many ways, contradicts some things that I've brought up already. So, to bring everything back to the main point of the video, we need to answer what the correct way to vertically invest is, and show the importance of it. The issue is that it's an impossible question to answer truthfully, and each account has very different goals, luck, preferences, and pre-existing characters. To relate this to me, I have essentially every archetype in the game, with some key eidolons on most of them, so I'd say I'm more of a player that mixes both vertical and horizontal investment. However, my investments aren't always done in the most optimal routing, whether it be because of my own preferences, luck, or just poor foresight on my front. As such, you get weird situations where my second best DPS isn't actually Firefly, even though it should be, since I have E2S1 Fugue and Dahlia. But instead, it's actually my Linksha, with my Rapid being a situational alternative. And well, I don't think I need to tell you how strong they are viewed in the community. What's funnier though is that I actually agree with what the community says. Those characters are terrible and you shouldn't really invest into them. But on my account, the investment is high enough to where it is my best option. Furthermore, it's important to note that my goals with my account is to zero cycle everything. With the context of my goals, focusing actually on horizontal investment is very important to keep up with zero cycling the night stages in Anomaly Arbitration. Whereas for someone who only cares about doing the 3 main endgame content, there's no real reason to do anything besides vertically invest into 2 to 3 teams with mechanics that favor those game modes. What I'm getting at here is that context changes everything, from what's a strong pull to even whether someone is even classified as a support or not, like with my Linksha. As such, what's the correct way to vertically invest matters solely on the context of your account. The reason why people make recommendations in the way that we do is because context is a variable that is impossible to accurately assess. So we provide advice assuming you're starting off fresh, with 0 outside factors that could impact the results. If I'm gonna be honest here, I could make a whole video on that context bit in the end, because there's so much nuance to it all, but that's a problem for a future me to deal with. Also, I said last time that I'd talk about the Nova Flares, but I think it'd be wiser to wait until V3, or once things finalize, because there's definitely some flaws in each of the Nova Flare kits that I'd like to see addressed before I talk about them. Anyways though, bye-bye!